At a family dinner, my brother smirked. Mom and Dad said I'm moving into the daughter they always used. Smiled. Funny, I sold it for $740,000 last week. Then I slid the papers across the table. His face turned white. I'm Piper, 34 years old, a real estate agent in the northern suburbs of Dallas. My life has been built from every dollar I earned myself. Those early mornings when I got up at 5 a.m. to meet clients before the sun rose, and the late nights returning home long after the streets had gone quiet. While I fought to hold my ground in a fiercely competitive market, my younger brother, Brandon, 32, lived in an entirely different world, one where every problem was rescued by our parents before it could turn into a real consequence. From a young age, I understood that if I wanted something, I had to find a way to get it myself. At 12, I saved every dollar from mowing neighbors' lawns to buy the sneakers I wanted. Meanwhile, all Brandon had to do was frown in a store and minutes later, our mom would pull out her wallet. My parents always said Brandon was sensitive and needed more support, as if weakness were a reason to be prioritized. In high school, I asked to work part-time at a bakery to save for a laptop for my senior year. Every evening, I came home smelling of flour and sugar, but the pride of earning it myself made it worth it. Brandon was different. When he said he wanted the latest phone, my dad bought it immediately so he could stay in touch. No one asked him to do anything in return. The difference carried into college. I chose a public university in Austin, juggling classes and a job in the administrative office, while also carrying student loans because my parents said I was capable of handling it. 2 years later, Brandon enrolled in an expensive private university in California. All his expenses, tuition, dorm, car, were fully covered by our parents. Yet Brandon dropped out halfway through, claiming he hadn't found his passion. While I worked my way up from the lowest positions at a real estate firm, saving every bit of commission to pay off debt and build my client base, Brandon bounced from job to job. He tried bartending but got fired for giving free drinks to friends. He worked at a cell phone store until inventory shortages got him dismissed. He even enrolled in an online marketing course but quit after a week because it was too boring. My parents never let Brandon feel real pressure. When he was short on rent, they paid it immediately. When his old truck broke down, they bought him a brand new pickup, saying it was so their son had reliable transportation to work. They paid off his credit card debt twice, following it with lectures on responsibility, always ending the same way, by pulling out their wallets. Some nights, I sat at my desk sorting through stacks of files, typing while my mom called to tell me about Brandon's latest hardship. She always ended with, family has to help each other in hard times. I would just give a dry laugh and change the subject. Over the years, I learned to swallow the sense of unfairness, but it smoldered like a live coal. By the time I was 33, I had paid off my student loans and saved enough to start looking for my first home. Meanwhile, Brandon had just lost his sales assistant job because the environment wasn't a good fit and was living with a new girlfriend. The gap between us had never been clearer. I had broken free from my family's financial limits, while he remained stuck in the same cycle of dependence and shelter. I don't hate Brandon. I'm just tired of realizing that my parents have never held the two of us to the same standard. I've had to push myself to prove my worth, while he simply shows up to receive everything. In the years after Brandon dropped out of college, our lives veered in completely opposite directions. I stayed in Dallas, working as a real estate agent while taking advanced courses to earn professional certifications. Every morning, I ran a few laps around the neighborhood park, grabbed a to-go coffee, and opened my laptop early to answer client emails. Every dollar I made already had a purpose: paying off debt, saving, investing in my work. Brandon, on the other hand, came back to Texas from California with no degree and no clear plan. He tried working at a sporting goods distributor, but quit after 3 months because he couldn't stand the manager. Then came a string of temp jobs, from delivery driver to event assistant, but each ended quickly with the same excuse: it wasn't the right fit. What I noticed was that he never truly put in effort to find the next job. Every time he lost work, Brandon went straight back into our parents' arms. My dad pulled from his retirement savings to cover the rent on a luxury apartment Brandon insisted on keeping because he didn't want to live in a dump. My mom sent him a few $100s a month, so he could eat properly. When the pickup truck our parents bought him needed a new transmission, they not only paid for the repairs but also handed him extra cash, so he wouldn't worry. I knew those weren't small amounts because every time they helped Brandon they told me about it over the phone, almost as if they wanted my approval. But instead of supporting them, I just felt the same old unfairness creeping back. When my own car broke down in college, I spent 4 months riding the bus in the brutal Texas heat to save enough for repairs. For Brandon, all it took was a single phone call. I still remember one Friday night when I was organizing client files and Mom called. Her voice sounded urgent, like something serious had happened. "Piper, I don't know what to do with Brandon. He's 3 weeks behind on rent and the landlord's threatening to evict him." I asked, "So what are you going to do?" "We'll cover it for him and he promised he'll pay it back next month." I bit my lip, keeping my tone steady. "Mom, how many times has he promised that? Has he ever actually paid you back?" She went quiet for a long moment before changing the subject. I knew refusing to help Brandon was unthinkable for my parents, and pointing out the truth would only make them defensive and protective of him. By the time I turned 34, things at work had started looking up. I was assigned high-value clients and my commissions grew significantly. My savings finally reached the number I had dreamed of. I began house hunting, not for a convenient apartment, but for a single-family home with a backyard where I could plant lavender and adopt a dog. Meanwhile, Brandon had spun himself into another cycle. He moved in with his girlfriend Tiffany in Fort Worth. She worked as a waitress and didn't make much, but Brandon still spent money like he was living with mom and dad. A month later, Tiffany called my mother in tears, saying Brandon wasn't paying his share of the rent and had even used her credit card to buy new speakers and book a beach trip with his friends. When that relationship ended, he went right back to our parents again. This time, they rented him an apartment near downtown Dallas, so it'd be easier to find a job. When I heard the news, I just shook my head. The place was more upscale than where I was living, complete with an outdoor pool and a state-of-the-art gym. The irony was that while I was calculating every expense to buy my first home, my brother, who couldn't hold down a job, was living somewhere I'd have to think twice before affording. And of course, my parents still called it temporary help. One night, I went over to my parents' house for dinner. Brandon was there, wearing a new jacket and holding the latest phone. Over the meal, he bragged about ordering a premium sofa set for his apartment. I asked directly, "Brandon, where'd you get the money?" He smirked. "Mom and Dad loaned it to me. Just a few hundred. I'll pay it back over time." I looked at my parents, but they avoided my gaze, as if they knew exactly what I was thinking. Driving home that night, I felt a mix of sadness and exhaustion. I'd worked for years to stand on my own 2 feet, but in my parents' eyes, that only meant I was secure enough to carry more weight for someone else. And Brandon was still drifting through life without a thought for tomorrow. After 8 years of saving every commission check, cutting down on vacations and skipping fancy dinners, I finally had enough to buy the home I'd always dreamed of. It was a single-story ranch-style house, 3 bedrooms, in a quiet neighborhood in North Dallas, where mature trees formed a lush green canopy every summer. The house wasn't huge, but the way the morning light streamed through the living room windows made every sacrifice worth it. On closing day, I left the office with the keys in my hand, my heart fluttering like a kid unwrapping a Christmas gift. My mom hugged me tight. My dad nodded and said, "You've done well, sweetheart." They came to the housewarming party I hosted that weekend, bringing a purple orchid that I knew my mom had chosen with care. All afternoon, neighbors stopped by to congratulate me, friends laughed and chatted, and I kept running my hand over the new kitchen counter just to feel the reality of ownership. Brandon showed up almost 3 hours late, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and holding a beer can. He didn't bring anything except a quick, nice place as he walked in. After a bit of small talk, he started complaining about a recent breakup and how he needed a change of scenery. I invited him to stay for dinner, but within minutes, he was looking around and casually said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, "This backyard's huge. Lend me the house next weekend for a party, Piper. I'll invite the whole group. It's been ages since we hung out." I laughed, thinking he was joking, but his eyes were dead serious. "No. I just moved in, and I'm not even done unpacking." Brandon shrugged. "Just a few hours. You need to loosen up. Living alone's depressing." I didn't respond, just refilled my water glass, but a cold unease crept in. I knew Brandon. Once he wanted something, he always found a way to get it, usually by getting our parents to pressure me. Sure enough, that evening my mom called. "Piper, I heard Brandon wanted to borrow the house for a party and you said no. It's just a few friends, nothing big." I stayed firm. "Mom, this is my house. I just moved in, and I'm not ready to have strangers over." There was a pause before she said quietly, "You always have boundaries, but sometimes you should be more flexible with family." That one sentence showed me exactly how far apart we were. In my parents' eyes, my success was a communal resource, available for Brandon whenever he needed it. Over the next few weeks, I kept busy finishing each corner of my home. I painted the living room walls a warm cream, placed a navy armchair by the reading nook near the window. Every morning, I'd open the curtains and let the sunlight flood in, feeling that peaceful joy of having a space that was completely mine. Brandon was different. He rarely visited unless it was to suggest using the house for this event or that group hangout. One Saturday afternoon while I was mopping the floor, Brandon texted, "We'll be over early tonight. Mom says you won't mind." I froze, heart pounding. No one had asked me, yet everyone had decided. I called him immediately, my voice colder than the AC. "Brandon, let me be clear. This is my house, and I do not agree to anyone coming over without my permission." He scoffed. "You're overreacting. We just want to help you break in the house." I hung up, locked the doors, and drew the curtains. No one showed up that night, but I knew this wasn't over. Deep down, I understood something clearly. I'd entered a new stage of life, one where I was fully responsible for my own property and happiness. But to Brandon and my parents, I was still this single daughter, whose assets were a convenient fix for someone else's problems. I realized keeping this house wasn't just about paying the mortgage, it was about protecting it from hands that saw my boundaries as optional suggestions. Less than a year after I moved into my dream home, hidden problems started surfacing like cracks you couldn't patch over. At first, it was just a small leak under the kitchen sink. I figured I'd call a plumber and be done with it. But when they pulled the pipes apart, they found the entire water system was badly deteriorated and would need a full replacement to avoid a burst at any moment. The estimate, over $6,000, made my stomach drop. I had just paid my annual homeowner's insurance and bought a new dining set for the kitchen, so there was no spare cash. I had to dip into my emergency fund, money I'd spent years building up, to fix it. I thought that would be the end of it. But a few weeks later, Texas rainy season rolled in, bringing a worse surprise. A leaking roof. The roofer climbed up then came down with a grim look. It needs a full replacement, at least $11,000. A patch will only hold for a couple of months. I felt like collapsing right there on the porch. Not just because of the cost, but I knew if this kept up, the expenses would pile up like quicksand, pulling me under. As a real estate agent, I knew the market was at its peak. Home prices in my neighborhood had jumped more than 20% in just 2 years. But selling the house I had dreamed of for so long, the thought was gutting. This was the place I'd painted wall by wall, planted flowers in, and chosen every piece of furniture for. It wasn't just property, it was proof of my years of persistence and sacrifice. That night, I called Emily, my longtime financial advisor. After hearing me out, she sighed. "Piper, I know you love this house, but from what you're saying, it's becoming a burden. You could sell now while the market's hot, take the profit, pay off your debts, and start fresh somewhere more manageable." Her words weren't wrong. I'd given that same advice to clients in similar situations. But applying it to myself was much harder. The next morning, driving to work, I noticed sold signs sprouting up everywhere. Houses were going in days, some for over the asking price. On my way home, I stopped by the office of a trusted colleague, Mark, to ask about a quick sale. He looked over my listing photos and paperwork, then grinned. "With your location and condition, you could list 15% higher than you bought it for and still get multiple offers. You could sell within a week." That felt like the final push. I went home, stood in my living room, and watched the last light of the day stretch across the hardwood floors. I knew I had to choose: cling to this dream until it drained me dry, or let it go to protect my future. The decision wasn't impulsive. I spent a week running numbers: outstanding loan balance, repair costs if I stayed, projected profit if I sold, and budget for my next place. Every calculation pointed to the same answer. Selling was the only way to avoid sinking into debt. One thing I kept secret: I didn't tell a soul in my family. Especially not Brandon or my parents. I knew exactly how they'd react. Brandon would see it as a golden opportunity to swoop in, and my parents would insist I keep the house for the family. I needed space and quiet to close the deal before the drama hit. Mark connected me with a young couple who were looking for exactly my kind of home. They toured it on a Wednesday afternoon. I stood on the porch, hearing them gush over the open kitchen and big backyard. Just one day later they sent in an offer, 5% over asking, with a quick close and the option for me to rent back for 30 days while I moved. I signed the papers with a mix of relief and heartache. In less than a month, I'd have to leave the place I'd poured so much of myself into. But I also knew I was reclaiming my financial security, something I'd sacrificed far too long to hold on to a dream that was already cracking. Sunday dinner at my parents' house had been a tradition for years. No matter how busy I was, I made sure to be there at 6 o'clock sharp because my father hated it when anyone was late. That night I arrived on time carrying a bottle of red wine, still keeping my plan to sell my house a secret. I intended to share it only after all the paperwork was done, avoiding pointless arguments. The moment I stepped inside, I sensed something was different. The table was covered with a new cloth, silverware gleamed, and a chilled bottle of champagne sat in the center. Something I had never seen at an ordinary family dinner. My mother was smiling wider than usual and my father stood up to hug me, saying, "You're going to be surprised." Before I could ask, Brandon walked in from the living room, wearing a crisp new shirt and neatly combed hair. A rare sight. He held a gift bag, setting it on the table like it was part of some ceremony. My mother tilted her head and smiled knowingly. "Piper, we have good news tonight." Once we all sat down, my father began in a formal tone, as if making an announcement. "The family has discussed it and decided on the perfect solution for everyone." Brandon cleared his throat and raised his champagne glass. "Starting next week, I'll be moving in with you, Piper. Just temporarily until I get stable at work again." I set down my fork, looking at each face around the table. My mother nodded and added, "You have a spacious house and it's a waste for you to live there alone. Brandon can take the spare room, help with cleaning, and keep an eye on things when you're busy." I stayed silent for a few seconds, feeling like I was watching a play in which I'd been cast without being asked. When all eyes turned to me, I smiled faintly and said slowly, "That's a nice plan, but there's one problem." "What problem?" My father frowned. "I sold the house. Last week." The table fell silent. Brandon blinked rapidly, his mouth opening but no words coming out. My mother set her glass down with a sharp clink, her voice sharper than usual. "You what? Sold it? Why didn't you tell the family?" I pulled an envelope from my bag containing the signed contract and placed it on the table. Here are the papers. The buyers take ownership in 3 weeks. I'll be renting a smaller place that suits my budget. Brandon snatched the papers, flipping through them like he was searching for a loophole. You did this just to cut me off, didn't you? No, Brandon. I sold it because the repair and maintenance costs were too high. I'm not going to drown in debt. My father interjected heavily. Piper, this is a big decision. Why didn't you consult the family? I let out a short laugh. Like the way you all planned for Brandon to move in with me without ever asking me? The air at the table turned thick. Brandon shoved the papers back toward me and stood abruptly. I already told my landlord I'd be out by the end of the month. Where am I supposed to go now? You can rent another place, find a roommate, or stay with mom and dad. I looked directly at them. My mother hesitated. Brandon's room is now my sewing room. My father added, the storage is full. Clearing it would take time. I laughed, but inside I felt cold. So I'm expected to give up my living plans to clean up someone else's mess? Brandon growled. You always think you're better than everyone. No. I just think everyone should take responsibility for their own choices. He stormed out, slamming the door. My mother sighed, her eyes glistening. You do this and Brandon will have nowhere to stay. Mom, he's not homeless. He has plenty of options. I'm just not one of them. Dinner ended without anyone touching dessert. As I left, my father said quietly, I'm proud of you for standing your ground. But this isn't over. Driving home, I knew one thing for sure. Tonight's shock was just the beginning. Their plan had collapsed and they would find another way to pull me in. But this time I was ready. Brandon came back the next evening. Not to reconcile but to keep pushing. He stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, voice flat. Piper, I'll be straight. I need a place to stay, and I think you should do the right thing for the family. I opened the door just enough to block it, not inviting him in. The right thing for the family, Brandon, doesn't mean sacrificing my own life to make room for someone who refuses to take care of himself. He raised an eyebrow, smirking. Still the same attitude. I swear, you always think you're the only one who works hard. No, I replied evenly. I just know that at 32, you're more than capable of taking responsibility for your own choices. My parents arrived moments later. Mom stepped in first, eyes full of reproach. Piper, I don't understand why you're being so hard. You know how tough things have been for Brandon. Mom, things are tough for him because everyone shields him from consequences. How many times have you paid off his credit card debt? Dad bought him a new car, covered his rent. You call that helping, but really it's keeping him from growing up. Dad cut in, voice stern. We're family. When one person has a problem, the whole family shares it. I'm not against helping, I said, looking straight at him. But helping means giving them a way to stand on their own, not turning someone else's home into a permanent rescue station. Brandon gave a short, mocking laugh. Listen to you like you're some family therapist. Truth is, you just don't want to share because you're selfish. Selfish? I raised an eyebrow. When I was 19, I paid for my own tuition and worked 2 jobs. No one offered to share anything with me. When my car broke down, I rode the bus for 4 months while you got a brand new car from mom and dad after one phone call. If selfish means protecting what I've worked my tail off to earn, then yeah, I'm selfish. Silence filled the room. My parents exchanged uneasy glances. Mom spoke softly. But you're in a much better place than Brandon now. You can afford to help, so why not? Because if I do, it'll happen again. He'll live comfortably with zero motivation to change, and next time, help will turn into taking full responsibility all over again. Brandon's tone sharpened. So you want me on the street? No. You can crash with a friend, find a roommate, or stay with mom and dad. Dad shook his head. The spare room's full of stuff and there's no time to clear it. Then clear it, I sighed. If you're willing to help, that's the most logical way. Brandon shot me a look, then turned to them. See? She just wants to kick me out. I felt my anger rising but kept my voice calm. Brandon, no one owes you a place to live. Just like I was never owed someone to pull me out of hard times. If you really want to change, you'll find a way. If not, you're choosing to stay where you are. Mom's eyes welled up. Hearing you say that, it hurts me. Mom, it hurts me too, being put in the position of carrying everyone else's load just because I take care of myself. Fairness isn't treating everyone exactly the same. It's setting the right expectations and letting them face their responsibilities. Dad stood as if to end the conversation. All right, Piper, I understand your point, but remember, no matter our differences, we're still family. I know, I nodded. And because we're family, I'm telling the truth. When they left, I stood in the doorway watching. Brandon didn't look back, stomping to his car and slamming the door so hard a neighbor glanced over. I knew things wouldn't be peaceful right away, but at least I'd finally said what I'd kept in for years, and this time, I wouldn't take it back. I had just shut the door when my phone buzzed. A text from Brandon. You'll regret this. I stared at it, exhaled slowly and set the phone on the table. Inside, I felt only relief, because at last, the burden called taking responsibility for someone else had been lifted, even if it was only the first step. Just 2 days after the argument, I got word from Mom that Brandon had moved back in with our parents. At first, I figured it would be like every other time. He'd sleep in until noon, go out late, and Mom and Dad would cover every expense. But it turned out things weren't going the way I imagined. Mom told me that the very night Brandon brought his stuff home, Dad placed a house agreement right on the dinner table. It spelled out clearly, Brandon had to pay $400 a month toward household expenses, buy his own personal items, handle lawn mowing, and trash duty every week. Curfew was set at 11 p.m., unless he had a valid reason. At first, I thought my parents were just bluffing, but Mom assured me they were serious. Dad kept the garage keys, so Brandon couldn't just use the family car whenever he pleased. Mom even locked the snack cabinet after 10 p.m. because he used to wipe out all the treats in one night. I couldn't help but laugh and strangely feel hopeful. The first week, Brandon reacted exactly as I expected. He complained that $400 is too much for an old room and that curfew feels like living in a dorm. But Dad was firm. If you want cheaper, rent somewhere else. Here there are rules. Surprisingly, Mom didn't rush to defend him like before. She simply said, Brandon, your father and I have been too lenient in the past. If you want to live here, you have to contribute. I stayed out of it, only hearing updates during brief phone calls. At first, Brandon skipped mowing the lawn and had the cost deducted from what he'd already paid, forcing him to make it up. One night he came home late. Dad locked the door and he had to sleep on the living room couch to remember the lesson. Gradually, Brandon started adjusting to the new routine. He took a part-time job at a nearby auto repair shop. Not glamorous, but enough to cover his rent to my parents and some personal expenses. Mom said it was the first time in years she'd seen him do his own laundry instead of dumping it in the machine and leaving her to fold it. 3 weeks later, I got an unexpected call from Dad. Piper, guess what? Brandon just had an interview at a big delivery company for a warehouse position. Not his dream job, but it's steady and comes with insurance. That's great, I replied, honestly surprised. I hope he sticks with it this time. Dad chuckled. I hope so too. Your mom and I have been setting aside his rent money so that if he's serious, we can help with the deposit on his own place. But we haven't told him yet. That news left me both relieved and a little amazed. It was the first time my parents were supporting Brandon while still holding him accountable. No more rushing to bail him out immediately. 2 months later, Brandon called me. His tone was calmer, without the usual blame or sarcasm. Piper, I just got hired full-time at the company. It's not a high position, but I feel like I'm starting to do something for myself. Congratulations, I told him sincerely. That's an important step. He hesitated for a moment before adding, I know I've made things hard for you. I'm not promising to change overnight, but I get why you wouldn't let me move in. If you had, I'd probably still be the same. I stayed silent for a moment, feeling the honesty in his words. Maybe it wasn't a dramatic turning point, but it was movement I once thought would never happen. One evening, Mom sent me a picture of Brandon painting my parents' fence. She wrote, my son's finally learning some manual work. I laughed, remembering how he used to find any excuse to avoid the word labor. I know the process won't be perfect. Brandon will still have lazy or impulsive moments. But at least now he's gotten a taste of responsibility, something my parents shielded him from for years. And more importantly, this time they're learning to set boundaries instead of rushing to fix everything for him. I didn't say it out loud, but deep down I felt lighter. For the first time, I wasn't the only one in the family standing by the principle that everyone is responsible for their own choices. And maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of lasting change. Not just for Brandon, but for my parents too. 3 months after moving out of my old house, I signed the papers for a 2-story townhouse in Northwest Dallas. It was much smaller than my previous 3-bedroom home, but perfect for me. 2 bedrooms, a garage, and a small patio just big enough for a cafe table and a few pots of herbs. No leaky roof or rotting pipes to worry about. Everything was new and under warranty. The profit from selling my last house covered a big chunk of this one, making my mortgage lighter than ever. For the first time in years, I could open my monthly budget without feeling a knot in my chest. I even built an emergency fund that could carry me for at least 6 months if anything unexpected happened. The sense of financial security was such a relief. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been all those years. On moving day, Mom and Dad came to help, bringing a simple lunch and a few old decor pieces I'd once loved. No hints about Brandon needing a place to stay with his sister, like before. Just focus on setting up furniture, hanging curtains, and cleaning every corner. Mom even said, you picked this place well. Manageable, easy to care for, close to everything. I smiled, saying nothing but felt the shift in her tone. Brandon stopped by that afternoon with a gift basket of roasted coffee and homemade cookies, something I never thought I'd see. He glanced around and nodded. This suits you. Small but tidy and warm. I replied, yeah, I wanted something easy to manage. No more spending every weekend fixing something. We didn't revisit old fights, but the silence wasn't tense anymore. Brandon said he'd saved up from his delivery company job and was looking for a 1-bedroom near work. I want to sign the lease myself. No parents co-signing, he added. I was surprised but just nodded. That's good. Doing it yourself will feel different. Over the next few weeks, Family dynamics leveled out. My parents no longer called me over every small problem Brandon had. Instead, they shared stories of him solving things, like picking up extra shifts to cover a car repair or negotiating rent with a new landlord. Mom even admitted in a private conversation, "You were right, Piper. I thought protecting him was love, but really I was keeping him stuck." I said simply, "What matters is we're all doing better now." I spent more time with friends and hobbies I'd put aside. On weeknights, I took Italian cooking classes. On weekends, I biked around the nearby lake. With financial freedom,